Howdy, everybody. Kamikaze Avalanche here. And I just wanted to give a practical tutorial, go over some key concepts in programming a video game. And the one I'd like to go over for this week is the concept of creating custom resources where you put in code. And code is basic functionality that every resource of that type is going to use, and then extending it to script additional functionality in for specific pieces of that resource, specific examples of that resource. And so this practical tutorial, we're going to go over that. I'm going to talk about how you put code in the custom resource and show an example of that. We'll go over that code uses export variables and it does not change and it behaves the same way for every example of that resource. And then how, if we want to have some custom functionality, we extend that resource and we put that scripted effect that we want in that extended resource instead of in the code. So let me bring you to my game so we can see an example of this in play. So my character has a bunch of pieces of gear, and all of the characters have gear and they all mostly work the same way. For the soldier, everything's pretty straightforward. The weapon has an attack value and it smacks the enemy. An upgraded weapon might have it set though so that it attacks every enemy around the soldier. But this character, my craftsman, he's unique in a certain way. And the way that he's unique is all of his items have a different effect depending on which gems that the card that activates the gear has. So, for example, he has his shotgun, his hand cannon, and if the card that activates it, it has to have a ruby to activate it. That's a requirement. To activate the hand cannon, the shotgun, you need to have a ruby. However, if the card that activates it has an emerald, he has a range of 4 to the attack. If the card that activates it has a blue gem, a blocking effect, the effect of the shotgun blast will be larger. So let's look at this in play. If I use wit to activate the hand cannon, we see it's got a smaller area of effect. We can hit, maybe if we're lucky and everybody was clumped up exactly right, we could hit 9 enemies. It's going to be tough to see us ever coming up with the situation where we'd hit more than that. However, one of the craftsman's special cards, Tinker, it has all 3 gem types on it. So for the craftsman, he's going to get bonus effects no matter what gear. He's going to get all of the bonus effects. So if I go with Tinker and I activate the hand cannon, you're going to see the bubble is much larger. If you get people at the edge, I don't know, maybe we could hit 12 enemies if they were clumped up properly. So the code is how much damage it does, how the area of effect works, and the range effects. But for the craftsman, I need special scripted events that go in that change those from the basic gear. So here we've seen what we're talking about. We've seen an example of it at play. When I play wit, I get certain variables in play. When I play tinker, it has all of the effects. Okay, so let's go into the code base on this one. And let me actually explain what I'm talking about. So all of the gear items I have are a resource. in this case, I'm going to look at the ingot as an example, just because I'm doing some extra stuff in here. But here, I have a custom class, which is a resource. It extends resource. So I gave it the class name gear. And in this class, I have export variable after export variable. So if you come in here, the ingot's in the third gear. It can be upgraded after the mission. The block card activates it. It has an effect on the player. It has, a block value of 1. So when they play it, it's going to give the player a block. It could give them move points. It could heal. If it was an attack one, I'd select if it hits a single enemy. If it targets an area, radius targeting is all the spaces directly around the player, how much damage it does, the range, the attacks, the area effect size. All of those things are export variables. So each of the gear is going to have different values in there, and I use the inspector to set those. And then when we look at the code that's in this custom resource, I go down here to activate the gear. It pulls those export variables, those variables that are set for it, and it says, hey, if player target is selected, right? So if this box is selected, then I go through, I write an entry to the log. It says the hero gains, and then if the block value is greater than 0, X amount of block. If move spaces is greater than 0, X amount of move. If the heal amount is greater than 0, X amount of heal. So if those values are 0, it's skipping over them. He gets thorns, he gets thorns, he gets damage resistance, so on and so forth. So when this gear is activated, it's going to write an entry to the log. It's going to check to see if those values are above 0. If it's set to target the single enemy, it's going to start a targeting effect. Otherwise, if it's a radius targeting, it's going to, smack all the guys around them. It's going to set, these are not export variables, but the number of times the gear has been used this mission and this turn before it goes on and does other things. So this is code. This is set. And for the code, it looks at these export variables from the inspector, and then it takes action based on them. And then here as well, you've got the gear single target. So if the enemy is hit by the gear, it looks through, and if it does damage, it's going to write the log entry and do damage to the enemy. And then, so while we're looking at this, there's 2 pieces I want to point out here. One of them is for the gear single target. So this is the function that triggers when an enemy takes damage from this gear. Or it's just targeted. They don't actually have to take damage, right? Because I could have them have an attack value of 0, and it just goes and it does the special enemy targeted effect, and it will trigger that function. The other one I want to point out here is I have another one that says if the special self-targeted effect is true, I want to do this function. So in the inspector, where that shows up is here. If I'm targeting the enemy, here's that tick box. If I'm targeting the player, here is that Boolean export variable, special self-targeted effects. So for these craftsman items, these gear that I want to have these unique effects to, I have those set as true. Now here, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to press down Control, and I'm going to click on this function name, and that'll take me down to that function within this gear resource. And then you see right here, in there, I've got nothing. Nothing's happening here. So the code doesn't have any special effects. The base class gear, this custom resource, doesn't have any of these unique effects that are unique to a specific piece of gear. So how do I set that up? Well, the first thing I gotta do is you're going to create a new script. And I'm just gonna pull up one that I've already got set up. And then this is for the ingot class of gear. And then so I've got it set up in the same folder where I have all of my ingots. And in the script, the important part is you go extends gear. So when I extend the gear, I'm getting all the functionality I have, all of the code I have built into this class resource. That custom script automatically includes all of this. However, going back down to this special self, it's empty here, but in here, I have the function called the exact same thing. And so this one overwrites it in the base class. In this case, I'm looking at some additional effects. So here, I'm passing the card that was used to activate the gear. And when we look at it, I'm going to look at the properties of that card. And if that card can interact, and what in the game that showed up by having that emerald, if the card can interact, I'm changing that export variable to say the block value is 3. Otherwise, the block value is 1. I'm also looking at if the card can be used to play an attack effect. And if it does, I'm giving the player an additional thorns for the rest of the turn. So player data, which is where I'm tracking all of that, dot thorns +1. All right, so how do I get this custom script added to this item? So in the ingot, when I go to this resource, you come all the way to the bottom, and it has the script that it's attached to. Now, for the normal gear I have, when I look at perhaps, let's look at my wizard type character who has the flame glove. The flame glove's a pretty standard piece of equipment. So when I created it, right, I right clicked and I go create new, and I go resource, and I'm going create new gear. And I'm creating a test resource in here. The test resource down at the bottom, it says gear because that's the type I set up when I created it. Let's undo this. So that's where you see the resource type. So for this flame glove, of course, it doesn't have any special effect. It attacks for 4 at range 3. It attacks for 4 damage at range 3. That's what this piece of gear does. The upgraded version of it, instead of attacking a single target, it attacks a small radius, area effect 1, 4 damage at range 3. So this is bog standard coded things. So it's just using gear.gd. Going back to the ingot, however, we come down here, and then so I take this script that I've got, the one that you can see here in the center, and I drag it to the script. If you don't drag it this way, you're going to lose anything that's already programmed in there, and I want to keep all of the information I have in here. If you overwrite the gear.gd, very often any pictures that are associated with it will disappear, and then so you would just have to, re-drag them in there. But this is an example of scripting. We want a specific effect for just this specific piece of gear. And so as a general rule of thumb, you don't want to hard code any values into your code. But for the script, that's okay. All right. I hope that explains the concept here. I'll bring the initial key points that I was trying to make. So we have a custom resource, in this case, the gear. It has code built into the base of that custom resource with the class name of gear. It doesn't have hard-coded values. It only uses export variables. Now, to make unique effects, we create a new script that extends that class name, uses a function that in the base class is empty, and we put our custom code in there, and we call that by having a specific Boolean variable, export variable that calls to it. Now, I suppose we could just always call to it, and if there wasn't any special code for it, it would just go to that function and pass and move on without needing to. I just feel that it's cleaner to have that export variable, true or false, to call to it. All right. And then the last part we saw is how to put that custom extended code into the specific resource that we want to use. Okay, I hope everybody picked up something from that, and I hope that somebody learned something. And let me know if you have any questions or suggestions in the comments below. Thanks, and have a good one, y'all.